Hi, and welcome back to U.S. History with me, Mr. Snyder. Today we're finishing up Chapter 7 and discussing the problems of the Gilded Age, and today we'll be discussing farmers and their push to end some of their problems with the Populist Party. Let's take a look at your learning targets. We're going to analyze the problems farmers faced and the groups they formed to address them. And we'll also assess the goals of the populists and explain why the Populist Party did not last. Spoiler alert, but they do not last and they do not win any elections for the presidency. So after the Civil War, just to review, millions of people move west. And factors out west spark a social and political revolution called populism, which is a political and philosophy that supports the rights and the power of the people. So people out west, the farmers, these rural people, didn't believe that their rights and their interests were being supported in Washington or in their state governments. And so they turn into a political party and start putting people up for election. And this is really the last major third party movement that we've had in the United States in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s. So what are some of the problems that farmers are facing? Well, we've already discussed crop prices are plummeting. Corn, wheat, cotton, you name it, all the prices drop. At the same time, prices for farming are going up as prices are going down. And so that's putting even more debt onto the farmers. They're mortgaging their farms. They can't pay for their mortgages. Some of them are foreclosed, so they no longer own their farms. Farmers are blaming banks and railroads because the banks are setting interest rates for loans at very high levels, which means when farmers borrow money, they have to pay a lot more back instead of a lower interest rate where they would only have to pay a little bit back. And railroads, there's no regulation. They can charge whatever they want. So these are the problems that the farmers are dealing with. Organizations seeking to end this and seeking change and relief for the farmers are called the Grange, or the Patrons of Husbandry, started by Oliver H. Kelly. And what they did is they provided education on new farming techniques, kind of a social get-together as well, a place for farmers to talk about farming. And they also petitioned the government for railroad regulation and grain elevator rate regulation, which was also out of control and costing the farmers money. We've already discussed the farmers' alliances, but they petitioned the government for low-interest loans. So they want the government to create the sub-treasuries just for farmers that would issue low-interest loans because they are farmers and they're doing an important job growing our food. And a lot of people sometimes take that for granted, but without farmers, where would we be? So the Populist Party is the party of the people, the People's Party. They want to build a third party alongside Democrats and Republicans. And every political party, every 4 years, usually before the presidential election, meets in a convention, and a big party's had, even still today. The goals of the Populist Party were stated in the Omaha platform because they met in Omaha, Nebraska. And like we've talked about before, they want the unlimited coinage of silver to fight the low prices. This would make their money worth more. Remember, they are not for the gold standard. They want to fight political corruption. They want the government ownership of railroads. They want the government to take over the railroad industry and the telegraph companies to fight high costs. And they also want regulation on interest rates in banks to fight economic corruption as well. And in the election of 1896, William Jennings Bryan, who is a person who has a lot of populist ideas, the Democrats say to themselves, well, maybe we should nominate William Jennings Bryan because then we'll have all of these populist people who will vote for him as well. And they do. And he gives a famous Cross of Gold speech at the Democratic National Convention, which advocates the unlimited coinage of silver instead of gold. And so populists throw their support behind Bryan after that. Unfortunately, we have the party of the Democrats, which represents the farmers and low tariffs, with the party of the Republicans who want a high tariff, and they are the party of big business. And eventually, the Republican challenger, William McKinley, wins over Bryan in both 1896 and 1900. These are pivotal elections. These change the course of American history because basically the country decides we are going to be a country of big business and not a country of rural farmers. So populism eventually fails before 1900 because the emphasis on monetary reform did not appeal to the urban workers. Those people who work in factories, they don't care whether or not the farmer has what he needs. They have enough problems of their own. They work 12-hour days in sweatshops. The party never recovers from their 1896 defeat. And even though populism fails, many reforms that they advocated for become reality in the early 20th century during the next section of U.S. history we're going to study called the Progressive Era. Things like a graduated income tax, the regulation of railroads, and a flexible monetary system. So even though populism fails, a lot of the things they wanted become reality in American history. And that's all the time that we have. That's the end of Chapter 7. I will see you later. Have a great night.
During the economic panic of 1873, agricultural prices were declining. Farmers, who were already suffering financially due to industrialization and urbanization, were in even greater turmoil as they saw their profits slip away. Many of these farmers believed that it was the Eastern bankers and businessmen who were setting the government's currency policy, and they began seeking change. Loosely knit farmers' alliances were formed during the 1880s, and they lobbied for regulation of the railroads, tax reform, and the free and unlimited coinage of silver. The pleas of these groups went largely ignored by the Republicans and Democrats. But the growth of the farmers' alliances was so rapid that talk of a third political party soon began. In 1892, a political convention in Omaha marked the birth of the Populist Party. The Populist platform centered mainly on the free coinage of silver, graduated income tax, government ownership of transportation and communication, and most improbably, the complete abolition of national banks. Other populist agendas include civil service reform, shortening the workday to 8 hours, immigration reform, and a law that stated that non-citizens could not be landowners. The Populists gained the most support among farmers in the West and South, who were increasingly disillusioned with the Democratic Party. But industrial workers in the East were also drawn to the new party by the promise of a shorter workday and pensions. In 1892, the Populists ran their first candidate for president and received over 1 million popular votes, a surprising show of strength for a fledgling party. In the 1894 midterm congressional elections, populist candidates collected nearly 1.5 million votes. This startling increase proved that many Americans favored populist politics, and the Democratic Party took note. In 1896, the Democratic presidential candidate, William Jennings Bryan, eloquently spoke on behalf of the adopted populist idea of free silver coinage. This change in party platform swung the majority of populist votes to the Democrats, who in turn lost to the Republican candidate William McKinley. This defeat, coupled with rising farm prices, brought about the dissolution of the Populist Party.